In Vegas, we got stuck in the desert, and we had a little hangover remix out there, man.
I wore a wig to school once, and they said no headgear was allowed.
How did
Spiderweb
was it
tights.
Obvious that it was a wig?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was having
a terrible
fun.
wig.
See, this is exactly why we have them on the show, and this is what makes them fun.
You're listening to KXVS, the voice of Stockton, 92.1 FM.
KXVS 92.1 coming soon. KXVS.
This broadcast will start in 60 seconds. This broadcast will start in 45 seconds. This broadcast will start in 30 seconds. This broadcast will start in 15 seconds. This broadcast will start in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Voice of Stockton. For more information on The Voice of Stockton, go to thevoiceofstockton.org.
The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of KXVS The Voice of Stockton or its parents, affiliates, management, and staff.
Welcome to Interfaith Voices of San Joaquin, a monthly program coordinated by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Stockton Social Justice Committee. I'm Jeri Bigbee, program host and committee chair. The purpose of our program is to explore social justice concerns in Stockton and San Joaquin County from an inclusive interfaith perspective. Our goal is to promote interfaith dialogue, understanding, and collaboration in addressing issues in our community. Today, we're going to be talking about the very timely topic of end of life. And we have two wonderful guests with us today. The Reverend Allan Sullivan from Hospice of San Joaquin, and Mary Bullard, retired nurse and representative of the Funeral and Consumers Alliance. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. So I have a few questions for you, and we'll just have a discussion. First, could you tell us each a little bit about the organizations that you work with, and particularly the kind of interfaith activities that you're involved in the community with your organizations? Allan?
So I am a chaplain with Hospice of San Joaquin. For those that aren't aware, hospice usually refers to a method of care and or a place to receive that care. And it regards holistic care for those who have a terminal diagnosis, are no longer seeking curative treatment, and as per their primary physician, it has been certified that based on evidence-based data, they probably have 6 months or less to be with us. So Hospice of San Joaquin originated in about 1980. A couple of wonderful professionals who were spiritually aware decided it was time that we got on board and began caring for our dying folks. And in 1980, the doctors, social workers, nurses all came together and began volunteering and donating their time toward hospice services. In 1981, they reached the point where they could actually hire their first employee to be director and develop the organization. That was Barbara Tognoli. So hospice then mainly dealt with cancer patients, and we're all pretty much nonprofit. Things have changed immensely. We're one of the few nonprofits left. So Hospice of San Joaquin, the reason I'm there, I've been with them for probably 10 years. I started volunteering with them, and I was already ordained as a Christian minister. And I was volunteered for a year, went to work with another hospice. 6 years later, they called me and asked me if I'd be their full-time chaplain because Jim was retiring. So my whole life flashed in front of me. I knew why I did all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I came to Hospice of San Joaquin as their chaplain. I'm there for the work, and I'm there for the team. The team is of a caliber that is exceptional. I mean, there is no parallel to the dedication and the competence and the compassion and the caring. I'd like to share maybe a negative situation to highlight the priorities and the positive reality of our organization. For whatever reason, far too many years have been going, and we have been having a disconnect and a divide with our upper management. They're not respecting and supporting staff as they should. And I'm not going to go into a lot of that in this arena, but I mention it because even in spite of that, our staff is unparalleled in their dedication and services. They, and when I talk about they, I'm talking, we probably have 130 paid staff. Our volunteers, our donors, our office staff, maintenance, IT, the field staff, our health aides are holy angels. It doesn't get much more humble than bathing our people with the tender love and care that they do. Nurses, social workers, chaplains, therapists, volunteers, everybody. We all know this is spiritual work. We all know it's bigger than any one of us, and it doesn't get much better than that when you're dealing with teamwork. So as far as our outreach, we have lots of outreach programs. We provide education for schools, hospital staff, facility staff, pretty much anybody upon request. We have volunteer training. We have support groups for grief management and bereavement. We have specific groups for spouses and parents. We had a wide range. I was telling Jeri earlier that there's probably a dozen people that could speak to the mechanics of our organization much better than I. But we do an awful lot, and we're available upon request to collaborate with anybody at any time to serve our patients and our community.
And you serve folks from all faith or no faith background, is that correct?
Yeah, we deal with lots of everybody. I mean, for us it's real simple. It's about spirituality, not reality. We're all God's children. We all live, love, and die. And it's a pretty simple thing. I think the one thing all religions agree on is that God's a spirit, and that spirit is love. So that simplifies it for us. If religion is involved in their life, we certainly will collaborate. We work closely with the diocese and the monks. We work with anybody who the family is interested in working with. We meet them where they are. Holistic care is mental, physical, and spiritual. So when it comes to the spiritual needs, we meet the family where they are. It's often funny because when we run into atheists, it doesn't take but a few minutes to get by that, because that anti-God turns out usually to be anti-organized religion because of the blatant hypocrisy they've experienced. Everyone believes in love, and once we get to that point, we're back together again.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, tell us a little bit about your organization.
Well, the Funeral Consumers Alliance was established about 40 years ago, a little over that, in 1976, so we've been around for a while. We're all volunteers. There's no connection at all to the funeral industry. There's no connection to any religious organization. We promote end-of-life planning and preparation. In other words, having all your ducks in a row, so to speak. Practical steps to be taken before death. We try to maintain public awareness and wariness as far as the funeral industry through education and often through publication, and I can go into that a little more if you want. We inform and instruct the public concerning the funeral industry and offer monitoring of the funeral industry on a local and statewide and, in fact, national level. We are loosely connected with a national organization. That national organization does a lot of publications of informational and frequently asked question type brochures and pamphlets. They do a lot of lobbying and have done so of many of the laws of the last 15 to 20 years, particularly governing the funeral industry, that have come out at the federal level, have been due to the efforts of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance. Part of what we do is to negotiate a contract every several years with a couple of the funeral homes locally here who offer services at a reduced price for our members. They are independent. Most funeral homes these days up in the country, about 85 to 90% of them, are owned by 3 very large national corporations, no matter what their name is. Years ago, we were associated with a funeral home, and it was bought out by one of these big companies. The prices skyrocketed, and we looked around for something else. So we have 2 now that are locally owned. They're Stockton and San Joaquin County bred and born people who care about the community, and they have remained independent funeral homes. And so they are the ones that we presently contract with now for several years. Our membership is open to everybody. Religion doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Whoever wants to join may join. We are by donation only. So people, though we respectfully request a $35 per person donation, we will accept whatever the person is comfortable with. And that is a lifetime membership. The death could be occurring in a day or 2 or 3, or it could be 70 years from now. They are a lifetime member once they're a member. And so we have been gratefully received by many people because they enjoy the fact that we have a lot of good information to give them. We send out 2 newsletters a year, and we update as far as any changes in funeral laws or any articles that we feel would be of interest to our members. So they enjoy the education. We give them a list of the brochures that the national organization puts out, which is on just such a variety of subjects about funerals and funeral services and memorial services, about embalming, about cremation versus burial, how to save money. 10 tips for saving money on a funeral is one of them. There's just a great variety of subjects, including common funeral myths, which I must say largely over the last 150 years the funeral industry has tried to convince us of, and which aren't true at all. And so we try to do what we can just to educate people and make them more aware. And I will say that people must join before the death. We can't join up someone after that has happened. So if they join sometime before the death, then they are members for as long as they live. And that is transferable if they move to another part of California, or if they move out of state. There's probably another chapter. We're all independent chapters and don't all do things exactly the same, but they would be able to transfer to a chapter near to where they live at that time. And we often do that. We give them a letter confirming their membership here, and they're accepted anywhere in the country where there's an FCA chapter.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Good.
Can I say one more thing about
Of course.
I have to mention that we've had a couple of other programs. So we have a palliative care program if you're critically ill and you're nearing that point where obviously there seems to be a decline coming. You can call us and we'll hook you up with that program, which also provides support. The next level is we have a transitions program, which means you may have a life-limiting illness but not quite ready for hospice admission yet. We'll give you support there too as much as we can. And so what our volunteers do, they're basically the heart and soul, the donors, the volunteers. I have a couple of favorites. one thing we do is well, first of all, maybe I'll show this. This is an interesting little rundown of what happened in 217 in the form of numbers. So what I don't know where we're looking, but what I'll do is this is the hospice at a glance. And so people received hospice care, 1,383. Kids received grief support at their schools, 57. Veterans are served, 179. Grieving loved ones received support, 3,569. Children and teens attended grief support groups, 71. And memory bears, 325, made in memory of a loved one. And I brought one of those because I also have a group of prayer warriors that are with the Church of Presentation. They make shawls for us. And every once in a while they'll call me up. They pray the entire time they're doing it. Then they pray for wherever that's going. So they're beautiful. But this Care Bear is amazing. We had a young man that was probably 40 years old, and what we do is we ask for an item of clothing. And this is just complimentary that we love doing this. The ladies that do this are incredible. And so he was 40 years old. His brother came to be with him, stopped his life from out of state, and just spent months with him, taking care of him 24/7, which can be really tough. Caregivers often have it much rougher than our patients. And so this was his favorite shirt and his vest. And we did this for his brother.
That's great.
Isn't that cute?
Nice.
But isn't that like the coolest thing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I want to show this. I mean, I don't know how to put this in front of the camera, but is it being seen?
There you go.
Okay, so this is it.
Yep, there it is.
Here we go. It's a little Care Bear. Got the Harley emblem on the back. That's it.
What a nice
That's
memorial
great.
These
to that
ladies
person.
are volunteers.
Yeah.
They are absolutely amazing. We have volunteers that have been with us for 20 years. We have staff that have been with us for 20 years. And so they keep me inspired and in awe
I can tell.
of their dedication.
That's great. So we'd like to hear a little bit more about you personally, and kind of how you've come to this important work, and including your own faith journeys. So, Mary, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I am a retired RN, as you said, and of course, through my life, at a very young age, had to come in contact with and deal with my own emotions and my own psyche as far as confronting death and the fact that it is an inevitable end for all of us. And I had to comfort and be available for family and such in that situation sometimes. So at an early age, I had to think about death, in other words, at a lot younger age than most young people do. And then through the years, I became interested in the Unitarian Church. I liked it very much because of the situation where we have people from a variety of beliefs there who continue to have their own variety of beliefs and varieties of spirituality, and all are accepted. And we just have certain ways we all tend to think we should treat other human beings, and so we follow that, but without insisting on any certain dogma. And I like that freedom. And so I've continued with that and become fairly active in that church, although that has nothing to do with the FCA. I became interested when I heard about it. My husband and I joined many years ago when it had been in existence just a few years. It just seemed like such a good idea to plan a little ahead and have things set so that children, for instance, if the time came sooner than this, wouldn't have to be floundering around trying to make decisions and wondering what we wanted and trying to plan something. It would all be set in writing, what we wanted when we died, where, what funeral home was to be called, all that stuff. So there wasn't a lot of last minute stress when that time came, whenever it came. My husband did pass. He became very ill, and about 20 years ago he passed. And I had the wonderful services of hospice. I can certainly vouch for everything Reverend Sullivan has said. They are fabulous, and they were a great help to him and to me. And so I have had a very, very, very warm spot in my heart ever since for hospice. We were members of FCA, and it was so easy. We just called the funeral home. They took care of everything. He wanted certain basic things. He didn't want a lot of money spent on a fancy funeral. He wanted it spent on his children instead. And most of our members want basic, simple services. And of course, they don't do anything that isn't required by the city of California as far as containers and that kind of things, or coffins. They do deal with strictly what California law approves of. But they were very helpful. And so I was glad that I had made that contact, and I became interested in FCA. And when I retired a few years ago, I just decided that was a good place for me to spend some of my energy. And so I have been membership secretary now for a few years and enjoy it very much, and make a lot of contacts with a lot of interesting, nice people, and I like spreading the word about it because I think it's a helpful thing for people to know about. So.
Great.
They're lucky to have
Great.
you. That's a great service.
Yes. Reverend
Awesome.
Sullivan, tell us a little about your journey.
Well, so my journey, pretty much my foundation began. I grew up, God blessed me with this spirit of joy in my heart. And by the time I was 17, I realized that spirit of joy that I felt surpassed anything that the world was selling as happiness. But it became very conflicting because I felt like a kind of a freak. I mean, going through school, I remember thinking, don't smile, because people would always say, what are you so happy about? Or why are you smiling? It was like, I didn't know. I didn't think about it. And God never gave me well, that's not fair. Churches never gave me the answer. But by the time I was 17, I was pretty conflicted. And I didn't know where I belonged, why I was even in the planet. I always grew up feeling like a stranger in my family. And as I got older, I was a stranger in the planet. Because in my little orbit, no one else felt that, right? And I know there's many people in the world that know it, but in my orbit, there weren't many. And so I pretty much begged God to show me what was going on, just to provide me with some understanding and the truth. And so he did. He took me out of my body, and he showed me what I needed to see, and he showed me exactly what I needed to know. And then he's crammed me back in my body. And then all I wanted to do was no more of that. All I wanted was more of that awareness, because basically, in words, I haven't shared this for decades because it was always too personal and intimate. But now we're making movies about stuff like this, so it's a little safer territory. And so what I experienced was existence and consciousness and bliss outside the body, and what it's like to be a soul separated from the body. So clearly, there was no question for me about what death was. Clearly, the soul and the body are related, but also absolutely separate and distinct entities. But I'm a very slow learner, so it took me 50 years to get into hospice. So I had a lot to learn. I didn't really want to be here. I was a religious fanatic for 15 years, chasing teachers and living at retreats and studying religions. From the time I had that experience, I wouldn't leave the house without studying and praying and meditating every day. And so that's always continued. After about 15 years, God told me that I wasn't going to be a celibate monk. I was going to be a householder. And I met Coral, who was this country girl that inspired me so much. She didn't talk about God. She didn't go to church. But it was common sense to her, and it blew my mind, so I married her. So we got 4 kids, 5 grandkids. We've had a wonderful, blessed life. 10 years ago, God told me to get ordained and go to hospice, so I did, and here I am.
Great story.
Yeah, it is a great
It's
story.
a nice
Good.
life.
Good.
And it sounds like they're lucky to have you, too.
Well,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm lucky to have them. I
Yeah.
promise you.
It goes both ways, doesn't
It certainly
Yeah.
does.
So this program talks about social justice. That's really the focus. So what's your opinion on, is end of life a social justice issue?
Want me to go? You got it?
Well, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, I have a thought, but you go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just because I got a thought too. And so if social justice refers to the concepts of human rights and equality, well, I think it's self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
We have the right to choose God and love while we're alive, and death is just the flip side. So Absolutely. We have the right to choose God during life, love, and dying and death. So it seems pretty clear that, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think there's a certain aspect where it might be considered social justice for people who want a dignified, simplified funeral at a reasonable cost to not be taken advantage of at the time of stress. Or they wouldn't be, but their survivors sometimes are.
God bless you.
There are a lot of funeral laws now that weren't there before, but there still are, as there are in any field, there are certain people who do not seem to have a conscience and are unscrupulous, and they will tell survivors that certain things are demanded by the health department, that certain things are part of state law that are not true. They're just out and out ways to get them to spend more money. And many, they're running a business after all, so sometimes they'll encourage embalming, which is almost never, ever necessary. It does not preserve the body. It does not, there is no reason to do embalming unless they're going to be sent on an airplane outside the state. There's some antiquated laws that the airlines have. And so we, of course, in that case, have to go by what their rules are. But short of that, there's almost never a reason for embalming, and yet that will often be pushed by some funeral directors as necessary to make them look better, to preserve the body, whatsoever. And that's one big expense that can often be avoided. That's just one example. People are under stress when a loved one dies, and to me that is not a time to take advantage of them and make them spend $2,000 or $3,000 more than they need to on basic services. So maybe along with that, I have a note here that I didn't cover, and I know some people listening to this might have a question. I keep talking about the reasonable price. If I can go off a little bit, the contract that we have calls for, as I said, basic services, basic containers. What's called a direct cremation is $635 at one place. The other place must charge $100 more, $735. Immediate burial, which is immediate means and direct means no viewings, no extras. Certainly you could add that on if you wanted to, but most people want just the basics. So immediate burial is $1,450, or at the other place again, $100 more, $1,550. And I know somebody would be asking about that. Cemetery plots are separate. That is between the survivors and a cemetery, but they must buy a plot if they want burial and don't have one already. So that's a separate subject. They don't deal with the funeral home on that. They deal with the cemetery. So I thought I would throw that in just because I know that might be a question some people have.
Right.
But I think, you know, things are certainly better than they were 50 years ago as far as laws, but there's still those people who will take advantage of a situation, and I think, you know, people need to be aware of that and need to have decided ahead of time what they want, what they don't want. Right. And that way the survivors won't be talked into something that perhaps the deceased never wanted in the first place or is plain not necessary.
Right, right.
You need more airtime, my dear. That's beautiful, and thank you for what you're doing. Because, our families are in crisis at that point, and it's terrible, and they're taking advantage of it.
Yes, yeah. Now, you know, traditionally, faith communities of all different faiths have been involved at end of life. It's kind of one of the roles of faith communities. So in some ways, it's very obvious that this issue or this topic is relevant to faith communities. How have you seen the involvement of faith communities, faith leaders in the end of life care and advocacy over time? Have there been changes?
I think there's been some change in that I think there's more people among part of the pastoral care of many ministers is to be interested in this subject for the sake of their congregants. And others maybe are a little hesitant to talk about it, the same as many of us are. Who wants to think about dying? We want to think about living, and of course that's a natural thing. And sometimes children don't want to, and sometimes even people in churches don't want to face till the last minute the fact of the inevitable. However, we must think about the fact that if we don't have death, then that means we weren't given the chance to have a life. You know, we would never have seen a baby, we would have never seen a rainbow, we would have never seen a beautiful lake, we wouldn't have seen anything if we hadn't lived. And the price for that wonderful experience through life is the fact that it must end sometime. And so I think there's a lot more willingness to have that conversation among ministers with their congregants, especially someone who comes to them. And we have found, for instance, again with FCA, there are some churches that are very interested in our brochures, some ministers that have been involved with FCA and have been very instrumental in sort of getting the word out to their congregants about that. So, you know, I think it's a much more open topic than it used to be. And I think people are realizing more and more that they need to do a little bit of planning for the end of their life, for the legalities of having used to be called a durable power of attorney for health care, or now it's called an advanced care directive, where they have plans for someone who can take over and make some decisions for them at the end. There's far more people willing to do that, I think, nowadays than there used to be. So that I take that as a good thing.
Good. Allan, what do you think?
That is good. Well, I think that the more we grow spiritually, because we are evolving, I mean, if you talked about what I just shared with you in the 50s, they would have locked me up. 100 years before that, they would have burned me at the stake. So we're slowly learning, but we are learning. And I guess I would just ask my brothers and sisters in the ministry to please become a little more informed with the spiritual aspects of dying and death, because our culture is pretty ignorant about death. I mean, when we talk about it as something final, it's really not. I mean, the residence in this vehicle, as this body is, but life goes on. God's love never ends. Those ties are never severed. And so when we talk about that, our culture bombards people with the ideas of that finality. Our culture bombards people with not only negating death, but trying to deny it, which is probably the most ridiculous thing in the world, because
That's
why
true.
would you try to deny something that the only inevitable thing that we know, number one, and it's not like God is all loving and all good, which he is, and then is going to throw in a dirty joke at the end. It doesn't work that way. So I promise you that for the one leaving, death is a wonderful thing. That's not to minimize broken hearts hurt. That's what they do. We all know it's temporary. We all know broken hearts hurt. However, there's light at the end of that tunnel too. When you heal from that, you come back closer to God, a little wiser in love, and you join your loved ones again. So it's a much nicer story than what our culture will tell us. So yeah, I would ask my brothers and sisters in the ministry to include God in that flip side of living, which is leaving here and continuing on to a higher place. It can be a beautiful experience, and we often have amazing experiences. It can be the greatest adventure of someone's life. We see it often.
Any other things that faith communities could be doing more or better in terms of end of life, since it is kind of our issue? Could there be more leadership on some aspects?
What comes to mind for me is that oftentimes chaplaincy in hospice is optional, right? Our healthcare workers, our volunteers, our therapists, they are optional. So if a family requests spiritual support, they are inviting me into their family. And sometimes I may not be invited through the process, but as it gets closer to the end, and I'm just sharing my personal experience, which is pretty limited, but it seems relevant. As it gets closer to the end, oftentimes then they'll ask for the chaplain, and sometimes it's because they even have a church family, which is why they initially did not request spiritual support. And the church family sort of steps away just for the reason of maybe not understanding the process. And I'm just guessing. I don't know why they step away. I just know that oftentimes when I'm called during or near the end of the process, and the church family's been present, somehow there seems to be a gap oftentimes. And I think it makes perfect sense to me that they too maybe feel as it's somehow negative or not necessarily understand the process. I'm not sure what it is, but in any case...
Or maybe they feel they just don't know what to say, so they stay away.
Exactly. But if you're going to a minister to nurture your relationship with God, I would ask my brothers and sisters in ministry to please start including the spiritual aspect of our being, which doesn't die. Our soul doesn't die, the body dies, but the soul doesn't. And every religion will speak to that in some way or another. I mean, the only thing they agree on is that God's a spirit of love, and that love continues. So I think that, yeah, some education, some natural realization, some understanding will come naturally, but I think that we could sort of expedite that too. I mean, God gave us awareness, will, and intelligence, and so I think if ministers start directing their attention toward becoming more educated, people like hospice who live and die with people daily and become very familiar with the process. I don't pretend for a second to know what's going on with God and someone on the other side. That's intimately unique and personal. However, there's many common occurrences in the spiritual transition that we call the dying process. And certainly it would not hurt anybody to become more aware of that process, since we're all going to face it, right? Right. I mean, Buddhism has a beautiful saying that every breath we take is in preparation for our final breath. I think that's beautiful. Our Lord tells us, Christ is my master, and I always say that with the utmost respect for whatever anybody does or doesn't believe, but Christ says it just as beautifully, don't trust the world. It's temporary. It won't satisfy your heart. Store your treasures in heaven. I'm bringing you home sometime. I mean, it's pretty clear. I think if Christians focus on that a little more, they may be more available at the time of need. Just an opinion.
Good point. We know that there are some end-of-life issues that are somewhat controversial, and faith communities have various perspectives on some of those issues, and I think that's healthy. One very timely issue here in California is death with dignity, also known as assisted suicide. And specifically, the California End-of-Life Option Act, which was passed in 2015, but was recently challenged in the courts. It has been reinstated, but it's still in debate. So I would be interested in just your feelings and opinions on this somewhat controversial issue. Mary?
It is, and I can understand the differences of opinion to a certain extent. I will say, in my humble opinion, this is applied when we're not having someone end a potentially productive life. This is... and I don't know all the ins and outs, but I know if someone wants this, they have to be declared by, I believe, at least 2 or 3 different doctors that they are, as far as anyone can tell, in the last 3 to 6 months of their life. That they must request it verbally twice. On top of that, they must fill out some sort of paperwork and submit that before it can be approved, and there's more to the process. So this isn't something where I'm just a little depressed one day and I say, okay, I'm going to end it all. This is quite a long process, and there has to be maybe working with their faith worker and the doctors and a variety of people to make this finally come to pass. And to me, it should be an option. We aren't talking about a mildly depressed person at the age of 25 who decides the world would be better without him or her. This is someone who is definitely on their way out anyway, and to me it prevents some of the horrible suffering that might entail, even with hospice. Some deaths are not beautiful deaths. Some are very rough, terrible, horrible experiences, and if someone wants to end that just a little sooner, by a week or 2 or a few weeks, I personally see nothing wrong with that. I know there's other opinions.
Allan, how do you feel about it?
Well, I got another humble opinion too.
Yeah.
And it's I don't have to share that right now, but when it comes to our patients, again, we meet them where they are. And my role as a spiritual counselor is to share as much as they are open to hearing about the Spirit and about the transition they're going through, and to help them as much as possible. I'm just a companion for them, and I meet them where they are. And so that is such a heavy decision that when it comes to someone else making that decision, I leave that to them totally, because just like we fall under the law of gravity, we also fall under the law of cause and effect, and we will all face the consequences of our decisions. So that is such a big one that they should have the sole right of making that themselves. My role would be to help them understand on every level what that may mean, as far as what they can comprehend or understand. I mean, that's a big one.
It is.
That's a big one, you know,
Yeah.
and yeah, we could talk about our opinion, but I don't think that matters right here. As far as our patients, that's their call. That's a big one.
Does hospice provide them with
Absolutely.
information
Absolutely.
related to what the state law
Absolutely.
currently is?
Yeah, and Mary is very accurate. It is a big process. It's not like, can I do this myself? Sure, go to the drugstore, buy this, and you're on. It isn't like that. You do have time, and you do have some relative hoops you have to jump through, which is practical. Thank God they do have those, because, yeah, things can get pretty painful at times. And so I think the process is good the way it's coming. Obviously, I think there's, 5 states now, Mary, or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, that have approved it. We've had a few folks in my, please don't quote me, I'm not absolutely sure in terms of how accurate, but I know we've had some folks, some of my patients have asked, and I said, absolutely, I'll provide you the information. To my knowledge, no one has completed the process. Either they changed their mind or they just left early. And so that's been our experience relatively with it. But that's a big decision, and you're going to deal with the consequences, and I'm not implying it's negative or positive. I'm saying this life is a gift. We're here to learn to love. Personally, I'll just say I wouldn't take control of ending that. I don't think that's mine to do. So that's my personal opinion that I said I wouldn't say.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you for your opinions on that. I think that's courageous of you.
It's something to be discussed more, and there are more and more states providing some legislation to enact that. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But and it's nothing anyone is forced into doing. It's their own decision, should be their own decision. They can go through all the hoops and still decide, no, I'm not going to do that. No one's going to force them to go through with it. It's always in their hands. So as long as it's that way, I just think that should be available for someone who wants it.
Yeah.
But not forced on anyone, of course.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't think of that. But
yeah, and I think that's beautiful. And I think that
it'll
should
be
offered
discussed
as
for
well.
many years yet, I'm sure.
And I think it's society's duty to get into issues like that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the Kevorkian days apparently are gone in some
Yes.
states now, and thank God. But yeah, I agree. It's in terms of society and helping out us. I think that's a good thing to offer.
Good. So, the amazing work that you're both doing. What if our listeners want to get more involved, volunteer, or become part of your organizations? Is that possible? What kind of contacts should they make?
Well, I could be very brief here. You certainly have millions of ways people can become involved with hospice. I will give out, if that's all right, I'll give our phone number and our email and our address, and people who are interested can either get more information about us, or if they want to volunteer to help us. As I say, we're an all-volunteer organization. We need people helping, and we'd be very glad to have anyone, member or not, who wants to help us. Our name is very long, actually. We shorten it for certain things. But we are the Funeral Consumers Alliance of San Joaquin County and the Mother Lode. That is our total name. And we do serve the Foothill area also, as well as San Joaquin County. So our post office box is P.O. Box 4832. P.O. Box 4832. And in Stockton, at 95204. Our phone number is available all the time. That phone number that I will be giving you is automatically forwarded to my cell phone. I'm the membership secretary, and I get calls all times of the day and evening and into the night sometimes. Fortunately, not too many of those, but I'm available all the time for people to call. And that number is area 209-465-2741. I'll give that again, 209-465-2741. And they could call that if they want more information. The email address is a little shortened from our full name, but it's still pretty long. It is Funeral Consumers Alliance of capital S, capital J, which obviously stands for San Joaquin County. Funeral Consumers Alliance of SJ at gmail.com.
Great. And I think we'll also post the website for the organization as well.
That would be good. That would be good.
Allan, how can people get involved with Hospice?
Hospice of San Joaquin, the phone number is 957-3888. Our home office is right across from UOP on Pacific. Also at that site, we have offices in Manteca and Lodi, but at the Stockton site is where our hospice house is. Folks can tour that. That's a facility where we have 6 private beds where folks can spend their final days there if they fall into the criteria. We have people in volunteers. We have people in bereavement. We have people that will specifically speak in much better detail than I could regarding all of our programs, and you get that through the main number. In terms of any spiritual concerns, you can call myself or any of the chaplains at the same number, and you can call me. Not everyone does this, but everyone's okay with it. With me there is that you can call me if it's something serious at 24/7, and they'll locate me.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Also, you spoke of the bereavement program, which is wonderful.
Indeed.
I have been impressed with the fact they also have bereavement programs for children.
Absolutely.
Children and youth, meaning, up through their teenage years, who sometimes are quiet and ignored, but are very, very hurt and moved and damaged, so to speak, by a death of particularly a very close loved one. And they have a wonderful bereavement program for those kids, and people should know about that.
Absolutely, and thank you. We have, our staff is just really unparalleled, and when we talk about children and or any of the programs, what Mary's referring to is one of them. We do have the grief and bereavement groups for kids. We also have a program called Camp Caterpillar, where the kids come and spend the whole day, and it's just unbelievable what happens there. I mean, there are miracles abound because our folks understand the heart, they understand the grief, they understand children as much as anyone can from the outside, right? But the things that happen are just absolutely miraculous. And so in terms of the staff, in terms of the organization, I can't say enough. I'm not a salesman, I'm not a television personality, but the reason I'm with Hospice of San Joaquin is because the staff, the volunteers, the donors, they have their heart in this. I mean, they know this is bigger than any of us, and when someone invites us into their home, it's one of the most humbling things and honor that, I mean, yourself. If someone invites you into their bedroom, their most intimate, private place in their life and world, and their loved one is dying on the bed, and they're trusting you, it doesn't get much more humble than that. So we take this serious. We're good at what we do, and I can't speak to this team enough. I mean, they keep me inspired and in awe. But thank you for reminding me of that.
Yes, and the other thing is there are other hospice programs in Stockton.
Absolutely.
But I'm not the biggest expert here, but I feel sure that Hospice of San Joaquin is still the only one with mostly volunteers doing the work and nonprofit. Whereas the other hospices are there, some with similar names even, but they are for profit. I'm not speaking against them necessarily, but I'm saying people need to realize they are for profit. And whereas Hospice of San Joaquin, I know, is nonprofit. So
Good job.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to thank you both for sharing such wonderful insights, and we appreciate this fascinating discussion of a very sensitive topic. And I'd like to also thank our viewers and listeners who have participated with us as listening along. And we look forward to next month when we'll have another Interfaith Voices of San Joaquin talking about an important social justice topic. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeri.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dustin.